Hello and welcome to this AITPM webinar. Before we get started, please ensure your microphone is muted and your camera is off. Do you have any questions for our presenters today? Simply use the live Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your question. We'll address any questions towards the end of this session. This session will also be made available on demand within the next 24 hours. The AITPM would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters throughout Australia. This webinar would not be possible without the support of our annual partners, including Matrix, SMEC, Stantec, and Veach Lister Consulting, our Network Insights partner, AIMSUN, our industry supporter, Aurecon, technical partner, GHD, and our academic partners, Monash University, QUT, and the University of Sydney. This webinar will begin shortly, and we hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kirsty Kelly. I'm CEO of AITPM, and welcome to our webinar today. I'm joining you today from Brisbane, the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'm on the banks of Maiwar, the Brisbane River, and it's lovely to be here with you today. We have a really interesting and exciting webinar on today that came about via some debate and discussion going on LinkedIn. And it's on the important issue of waste collection and designing for that. So we've got Andy Johnston from Urbis and Dr. Sipan Pereira from the University of Sydney ITLS, who have just recently come on board as an academic partner. So it's fantastic to have Sipan here representing them and have them involved in AITPM. But for today's session, it is going to be an interactive session, so do be prepared to do some surveys. So have your phone handy to scan a QR code and be ready to answer some questions as we go along. As it said in the introduction, please use the Q&A function there to post any questions in. This is really designed to be a discussion around this issue and looking at how we might be able to do things differently, looking for some alternative solutions. The guys have been working on this and have got some ideas for us, but they're really looking for your feedback as well. This is an issue that we're hoping that we'll be able to have further conversations about over time and build on this. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand straight over to Andy and Sipan, who will take us through the presentation. So welcome to you both, and let's get started with the session today.
Apologies, guys. I was on mute. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into this. Sipan and I were a bit taken away by the registrations in this, and we're really excited to share this, and I'm sure it's something that we're all care deeply about and affects our daily basis. So without much further ado, a balancing act: how refuse collection shapes urban density. First of all, acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we operate on. We recognise that First Nation sovereignty was never ceded, and respect First Nation peoples continue in connection to these lands, waterways and ecosystems over the last 60,000 years. We pay our respects to First Nation elders, past and present. So who are we?
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Sipan Pereira. I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies at the University of Sydney. I'm currently leading a project funded by Transport and Main Roads Queensland called TRIPS, where we are developing a national database for land use trip generation surveys. I have around 15 years of experience in the transport industry in both private and public sectors. I have previously worked at Transport for New South Wales and Stantec. I have also worked in the transport advisory teams at Urbis in both Sydney and Melbourne. I am very much excited to be a part of this discussion today with Andy. This topic of how we transport waste is becoming increasingly relevant in light of the housing crisis we are facing in Australia at the moment. It actually gives us the opportunity to rethink how we traditionally do things and to plan and optimize transport infrastructure to achieve the best possible outcomes, particularly relating to density. So I'm looking forward to sharing our insights and getting your feedback on this topic today. Thanks.
And I can't plug the good work that Supun's doing enough. His national trip database will make all our lives so much easier and provide data to our fingertips. So I'm a big supporter of what he's doing. I hope you guys keep in touch with him and follow what he's doing pretty closely. Myself, my name's Andy Johnston. I've got 20-something years of experience in traffic engineering and transport planning in both the UK and in Australia. Most of that time has been in Australia. I lead the Queensland Transport Advisory Group at Urbis, and this is something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's smaller projects or huge master planning projects. It's something that we need to think about and how we actually deliver solutions for the community.
Okay, so we have an exciting agenda for today. We'll first start by setting the scene, exploring how waste management fits into the bigger picture of land use planning and why it's such a crucial part of development. Next, we'll take a look at current waste collection practices using real project examples to understand how and why things are done the way they are. From there, we'll dive into challenges and limitations of these practices and explore any opportunities for improvement. Then we'll discuss our recommendations and future directions, looking at practical ways to improve efficiency of waste collection while balancing other planning priorities. Throughout the webinar, we'll be collecting your insights via online surveys, and if time permits, we'll go through some of the results at the end. Otherwise, we'll collect and incorporate your feedback into our ongoing work, and we'll keep you in the loop via AITPM communication channels.
So why are we here? This has been a bit of a burning topic for Supun and I, and probably a lot of you as well. We design our precincts, our buildings, everything around our waste collection. And quite often it can be one of the biggest challenges that you get over. But before we go into what we do and how we deliver that type of stuff, what I wanted to do is probably set a bit of context about what we're actually doing. So in reality, what we're designing for is usually a maximum of 3 movements a week, less than new development or lower density developments. The median duration of collection operation in high density apartments is about 8.5 minutes. So when you sit there and look at the context of what we're delivering for an occurrence that is about 0.255% of the week. And that drives a lot of the outcomes that we're doing over that time. And it's probably worthwhile taking a step back because we know it's important and we know that refuse collection needs to work. But the fact that that 0.255 drives so much of the ground plane and the urban space that we're trying to do, we need to think about how we can do that as efficiently as possible and with the greatest benefit to the greatest amount of people. So what do we do currently? Quite often we design for a large refuse collection vehicle to make all movements within a site. And we end up with a solution like this, but quite often in practice it gets collected from the street anyway because it's easier just to pull up at the side and drag the bins out. So we end up with a situation with this huge expansive concrete, quite an ugly urban form. Why not have something like this to start with and have a think about whether we need that turning on site or whether we need this to be done to start with. And the reason it drives this is we have these big refuse collection trucks. They're usually between 10 and 11 meters and have a height requirement of between 3.6 for a rear loader, right up to 7.1 for the bigger rural compaction collection things. So it takes up a huge amount of space when we have to design for these vehicles. And sometimes, do we always need to be designing for that? As well as when we're looking at some of the urban development forms and and some of the precincts that we're looking at, we tend to overcompensate for how much space we need. We need widths of like 6.5 meters just in case two larger vehicles meet each other in a laneway or meet each other in a driveway. And in reality, are we providing too much space in that? Are we being really conservative? Because we always seem to design for what's the worst possible case. Are we ending up with too much concrete, too much bitumen, which then takes away from some of the other space that makes our world a better place to live and something that we really enjoy?
All right, let's jump straight into our online survey one. Erica, if you don't mind, can you drop the link to the survey into the chat? Perfect. So with this survey, we are hoping to gather the general sentiment about this topic from you. We have 3 questions for you, and it would be great if you can provide a response from 1 to 10, 1 being you strongly disagree, and 10 being you strongly agree. If you are joining us from a phone, you can simply scan the QR code on the screen and it will take you directly to the survey. In the interest of time, while you are filling out the survey, we are hoping to continue with the slides. The survey itself shouldn't take that long anyway.
Yeah, and take as long as you want. We want everybody to fill in this survey. We're really interested in hearing everybody's opinions. Spoon and I have been furiously talking about this between the two of us over the last month or so. So it would actually be very valuable to hear some outside thoughts on this, because we've become a bit of a it's just been me and him going back and forward again for stuff. So feel free to keep going while we talk about this next element.
Perfect. Okay, so let's move on. So
this, I think you're on mute, mate.
Am I?
Oh, no.
No? Okay, good. So this, what you're seeing on the screen is a real project in Sydney. We are using it here as an example to demonstrate the impact the waste collection vehicle has on the design of the building. In this case, the development was requested to accommodate a 12.5 meter long heavy rigid vehicle for waste collection. You can see on the screen the swept path of this vehicle within the site. Now let's look at how the design of this building has been impacted by this need to accommodate a HRV. First, as you can see, the crossover width is excessive. The design had to accommodate the waste truck turning out of the site onto the curbside lane. And this swept path is actually missing one piece of information, which is a 99th percentile passenger vehicle entering the site simultaneously while the HRV is exiting the site. So again, there's a lot of conservatism built into the design. This simultaneous access for waste truck and a passenger vehicle is generally a requirement for developments fronting state roads. However, in the worst case scenarios, some instances, this requirement is imposed for the sites with access of local roads. As you can see, the result is an excessively wide vehicle crossover, which impacts both visual amenity and pedestrian safety. Second, to accommodate the 12.5 meter HRV under Australian standard, you need to provide a headroom clearance of 4.5 meters throughout the path of the vehicle. Again, this leads to an over-design of height, and it impacts the building height limit. Unlike excessive space allocations, the excessive height allocation of a building cannot be retrofitted or modified, meaning that in future, if the building owner is capable of using a smaller truck with a low headroom clearance requirement, this excessive height clearance is essentially wasted. Finally, as you can see, there is a lot of space that needs to be allocated for parking this large truck within the site and enabling it to maneuver so that it can exit the site in forward gear. As Andy mentioned at the beginning of this talk, this space is mostly unused. To be specific, it is only used less than 1% of the time in a week. In most cases, this space is actually usable area for something that is more important, either in terms of amenity like landscaping or density like additional habitable floor area. I'm now showing the same building and how different the design would have been if we were to simply change the size of the waste truck from a HRV to a small rigid vehicle. I have highlighted in red the areas that can be recovered and used for some other purpose. As you can see, this arrangement leads to a more compact design with least amount of space allocated for vehicle movements. Also, small rigid vehicle trucks generally don't require more than 2.5 meters headroom clearance. This clearance is the same as the headroom clearance you need to provide for disability accessible car spaces under Australian standards. So when you use a smaller truck, your parking design does not have to change much more than what you are already designing to provide for passenger vehicles. When looking at these two images side by side, it becomes clear that it is currently a case of the tail wagging the dog, where the achievable development density is purely dictated by the waste truck size.
Why are we here? Why is this happening? Well, look, it makes sense when you take it through. So first of all, we very sensibly try to minimize the operational cost to ratepayers by using as large a truck as possible so that we get as minimal amount of movements and the minimal amount of vehicle turnover in a week. If you've got a large vehicle, it means you can collect bigger amounts of traffic. You can collect waste from many different vehicles. Well, what does that mean? It means that council policy then requires designs to cater for larger trucks, and that becomes the standard for what we do. So far, all good, but then we start to see the impacts of that. Development density is negatively impacted because we get less amount of development, we get more space given up to concrete and bitumen and hard stand. And what that does is then that negatively impacts on ratepayers and purchasers because we don't get the same density. Buildings become more expensive. It impacts housing prices, but again, it also impacts those ratepayers because you are paying for these things to happen again and again and again. Whereas there's probably more efficient ways to looking at this so that we can all share in those benefits.
All right, so here we have captured the two key variables that we are trying to balance. On the horizontal axis, we have the cost due to collection frequency. So in the most extreme scenario where you use a small truck to collect waste, but it needs to go back and forth between sites and a landfill or the waste treatment facility more frequently due to it having limited capacity. So the operational costs increase. On the vertical axis, we have the cost due to development space lost. In the extreme scenario again, you have to accommodate a large waste truck on site, and as a result, you lose a lot of valuable space, impacting the optimal density we can achieve. Between these two extreme cases lies our sweet spot, which is the ideal balanced outcome, which minimizes both the development space loss and the cost due to collection frequency. In fact, it is sensible to have a solution that brings down the cost due to development space lost. So ideally, you would want to be along the bottom of this graph. As you will see later in this talk, there are ways we can bring down the cost due to collection frequency over time, either through technological improvements or establishment of waste transfer stations and so on. However, the cost due to development space lost is more permanent in the sense that once the building is over-designed, especially in terms of height clearance, there is no going back or retrofitting that space for another use in the future. Okay, so time for the second survey now. Erica, can you please drop the link into the chat? Perfect. This is a really interesting one. Andy, do you want to give some background?
Yeah, this is one that both Supun and I were chatting through early stages of this presentation, and Supun brought this up, and we thought it was an eye of the beholder type thing, because you could show this picture to many different people and they would get various different things. Since then, I've showed it to the various members of my team, and I've had a range of experiences of, yeah, this is a great solution, or no, that these are the issues with this. And what we wanted to do is get everybody thinking about what is this solution? Is this something that's acceptable? Is this something that's working? Or is it something that's a real problem, that what's happening here? And just find out how people feel about this and what you think.
So in that survey, you'll be asked whether you think this is acceptable or not. And then the second question is why you think what you're thinking. So we just want to see what sort of considerations are behind your answer, which is going to be quite interesting.
Yeah, what's driving it? What do you see as being the issue with that? And it'll be interesting to see if those things are really easy things, like, well, let's not prejudice what you're thinking about. Might just go to the next thing. So we've outlined the problem. It'd be easy to sit here with our arms folded and be like, see, it's all broken. What do we do now? Well, Supun and I have spent the last month, after we'd felt really smug about ourselves, about we'd found out all the issues. Then we had the harder challenge about, well, what do you do? What can we do to improve how we practice these things in the future? So we've pulled together 8 potential approaches that could be used. And not all of these are applicable to every development. So you may look at these and think, well, that's fine for that. But it's about try to expand how we think about things, and rather than being prescriptive, about what measures we can bring in. So first of all, at the moment, most jurisdictions in Australia have a legislative levy for waste collection that local authorities have to collect. So where you have a council vehicle, you need your waste collected by a council vehicle. If you want to go for another solution where you get a smaller vehicle or get another non-standard vehicle, you still need to pay a waste levy to do that. Is there anything we can do to make that a little bit more flexible, where maybe there's another way of doing stuff? Maybe we need to look at examples where someone getting a private contractor can get an exemption from paying that levy. Now, I know that some people are, well, developers should be doing X, Y, and Z, but where I'm thinking about is for things like social housing, those sort of affordable solutions where we're really trying to push that lower end of the market, retirement as well, where there might be solutions where getting a really high density solution might be the difference between getting another 3 or 4 units and getting more people housed and getting that done in a more affordable manner.
So in our research, we came across this white paper developed in the ACT titled Better Waste with Waste. In this paper, they mentioned that in the ACT, multi-unit developments had to accommodate front-loading trucks that needed 6.5 meters of height clearance. The white paper says that building designers say that up to 2 units are being sacrificed in multi-unit buildings to accommodate on-site access for large waste trucks. So after consulting with the Property Council and developers, the ACT government decided to increase the level of flexibility in their waste collection vehicle fleet. They adopted a new truck fleet that only requires 4.3 meter height clearance as opposed to the 6.5 meter height clearance. So this case shows that there is definitely scope for more flexibility in the waste collection vehicle fleet. I'm also sorry, go on.
And probably, Supun, that's something that where you've got councils with higher density and more unit type developments, it might make sense for there to be more flexibility in the fleet, because actually you've got more developments that require more of that smaller things coming in, and it might help increase that density, especially with the housing targets coming out by the federal government.
That's right. So I'm showing here some examples of smaller waste collection vehicles, and if you can click through. So some small waste collection vehicles accessing car parks purely designed for passenger vehicles. So these smaller waste trucks can navigate highly constrained car parks with low headroom clearance and with high levels of ramp gradients that are designed on the basis of passenger vehicles. So there is much to be gained from being flexible in the waste collection vehicle fleet in terms of amenity, safety, and space savings.
One of the things that we'd flagged earlier on was with these smaller vehicle fleets, you lose that efficiency of being able to collect things from large developments, then yet might end up doing more runs to service vehicles. What we've looked at, and this is something that's come up in various areas and across the world, is having centralized transfer stations. So you can have smaller vehicles coming and servicing a localized area, taking it to a transfer station, And then every so often that is then serviced by a larger truck. Obviously, again, that works better for larger local authorities who may have more ability to do that. But again, this could be a solution where smaller local authorities could band together and compile that type of stuff in order to get a waste transfer station that allows you to do this sort of movement. So even with the smaller vehicles, you're still not having to lose that efficiency.
All right, so let's now talk about the curbside. Proactive curbside management is perhaps the most important aspect for achieving a balanced outcome for waste collection. The function of the curbside at different contexts is well understood under the movement and place framework. However, what is missing in this framework is the variable time, meaning that the movement and or place function of the curbside changes depending on the time or day. A good example I see is in the Chinatown in CBD. During lunchtime and evening times, the laneways are busy and bustling, highly pedestrianized with minimal vehicle movement. So it is essentially functioning as a place as it is supposed to. But if you visit the same area late at night, the place is full of servicing and delivery trucks, meaning the function of the laneways has shifted from place to movement. So by considering the fact that we can proactively schedule waste collection vehicle times, we can optimize the use of curbside at the right time of day. For example, in local roads, you could have temporary parking restrictions on collection days so that curbside collections can be done for multi-unit developments. Another reason why curbside collection is generally not considered for multi-unit developments is because you tend to have lots of individual bins from each unit and not enough site frontage to place them all and collect them all in a row. In the white paper from the ACT that I previously mentioned, they are now allowing curbside collections for multi-unit developments. The catch is, however, that the development will need to have shared bulk bins. So this way you consolidate the waste from multiple units and have these bulk bins collected at the curbside, so the waste truck does not have to enter into the building.
There's probably a sustainability aspect to this as well, Supun. When we sit there and we're trying to do more with reducing embodied carbon, actually making our road space sweat a little bit more and do more with it at different times is a really sensible way of doing stuff, so that we're not having to construct more things to do the same job, and actually use that space smartly, rather than just having it doing the same thing all 24 hours.
That's right. So that was actually a really good point, Andy. So this topic is becoming increasingly important in light of the new plans we have all across Australia to tackle the housing crisis and to achieve higher levels of densities in urban areas. A few months ago, AITPM published their first policy issues paper on decarbonizing Australia's transport system. One of the recommendations in that report is on consistently challenging the need to build new transport infrastructure and instead looking to low build or no build solutions that essentially optimize the use of existing assets. So I think what we are doing here is quite well aligned with that recommendation.
Go to one that's probably a little bit more high tech. Now, this is a solution that isn't for every single precinct. It's probably not going to be something that we're going to retrofit into existing older developments, because it involves a lot of underground piping and involves pneumatic pushing and pulling of the waste collection. But this isn't as space age as you think. Obviously, this is one from the outskirts of Paris, but this is something that's also been developed in Maroochydore City Centre in Queensland, where we've got new precincts that are coming in and being built and we've got high density. This could be a really good trade-off from having centralised waste collection areas where everything's connected through pneumatic networks to then collect the waste and then push it out and be collected from a single place. This again is something that allows us to provide new technologies to actually solve our existing problems rather than having big, expansive concrete turnaround areas. Supun, is there anything else that you'd like to add to this?
Not really. Didn't we have real examples of this in Queensland? So
Yeah, Maroochydore City Centre
yeah.
is currently implementing this.
Mm.
And if anybody online has got any solutions that you guys are seeing out there, we'd love to see them. And I think Ollie's would probably like to go and actually visit some of these things and see how they work in practice. Because yeah, in brownfield sites, it's probably not going to happen, but where we're getting brand new facilities, I mean, I know that quite often we look at precincts where you're constrained on each of the road frontages in order to get activation by pedestrians, cyclists, get deep planting in. You're starting to cut away those sort of things, and if you can then consolidate the waste collection for all of them, it's going to make things a lot easier. Another thing is looking at the street design and being more flexible. I touched on this earlier on where we had minimums of 6.5 metre wide roads and laneways just in case. Years ago, I came across this in manual from Streets from the UK where they looked at residential design and started to look at, well, what sort of space do we actually need for various vehicles to be able to manoeuvre through street networks and do these separate things? And what they came up with these minimum street distances where they actually said, well, how much space do you need to actually circulate past there? And even like in a 5.5 metre, you can actually get trucks to pass each other at slow speeds with care and attention, which is what we want to be doing. And this made me think about examples where we've got older street designs where we actually get to service things at the moment. So there's one pretty close to where I work in Brisbane, and this laneway that I go past pretty regularly, it's about 3 and a bit metres wide. It's really, really tight. And you would look at that, and it's also a dead end. It's not a through lane either. And you would sit there and look at that and go, well, obviously everybody in this laneway gets service from the street. There's no way a waste collection vehicle would get down there and be able to manage that. Until one of my team actually done a project for the reuse of one of these buildings here, and they managed to get a hold of some CCTV, which shows that down this laneway, all the waste actually gets collected from the street, and this is CCTV of a council waste collection vehicle coming down there and picking that up. Now this shows that even with not changing the waste collection vehicle, not looking at any innovative standards of doing stuff, just with actually thinking about how we could manage this and managing that in a timely manner so that we're not doing this in the middle of the day, that you're coming along very early in the morning or later at night to be able to do that type of stuff, you can actually service these really tight, constrained areas. So it's worthwhile is taking a step back and just, often we sit there and go, no, it doesn't meet the standards, let's move on, we need to find another solution. Sometimes in places like this, where we're not able to go and find another solution, you need to go back and say, well, do we need to look at our assumptions again? And those assumptions about not being able to do this are obviously incorrect.
All right, so this is an interesting observation. We have looked into refuse and recycling generation rates for various land uses as published in the documents across different states and LGAs in Australia. You can see some examples in these graphs on the screen. The vertical axis shows the waste generation rate in liters per week. As you can see, there is a very high level of variation in these generation rates. This high variation in waste generation rates translates into high variability in space allocation for some land use types, depending on its location. For example, if you adopt the childcare center rates, which from the graph appears to have minimal variation, but when you apply these rates to a typical development, say for an example, a childcare center with 1,000 square meter gross floor area that operates 5 days a week, you get vastly different generation rates. To be specific, at the lower end, you get an estimate of 3.5 cubic meters of refuse a week. At the higher end, it's 12.5 cubic meters of refuse a week, so which is more than 3 times the lower end estimate. And obviously, larger the development, more pronounced this variation is. So on this front, I think we need more research on waste generation rates for different land use types to inform a nationally consistent guide for waste generation. Before we Sorry, go on. Yeah.
That's a really important point, Supun, because I think as transport professionals, we're actually quite good at squeezing the transport elements out of having a look at how do we maximise these swept paths, how do we minimise the turning area and things like that. But more and more, the space that bin room takes up is driving the ground plane of developments, and actually having data that tells us exactly what we should be designing for is very, very important. And I think, Supun, this would be something that'd be great if the TRIPS database that you're looking at could actually look at stuff like this. And I think it'd be really helpful for us as an industry if we could have a national database that we all trusted, that we could go to and then just look at these sort of rates for different types of developments.
Great point, Andy. Thank you. And just a side note before we move on, many of the current development approvals are informed by how existing similar developments operate. This, I think, is not a sensible approach because it keeps us trapped in the predict and provide mentality, as opposed to looking at how many sort of waste trucks of which size is being used in current developments and using that to inform the future developments. It would be better to go down to first principles and look at exactly how much waste is likely to be generated by a given development, and then formulating the best way to collect this waste. I think that kind of approach lines up quite well with the vision and validate framework we are all trying to move towards in transport planning practice. Okay, so let's look at neighborhood scale collection points. The traditional door-to-door collection by individual buildings tends to maximize the number of truck stops, the number of truck trips, vehicle kilometers traveled. So anytime waste can be aggregated between buildings or between different businesses, in fact, in the same building via push carts or small electric vehicles, the environmental and public health impacts can be minimized. So this arrangement is great for high density precincts that can use shared compaction bins that are stored underground. These bins can then be lifted and unloaded onto a truck. This approach looks futuristic, but it is already adopted in Australia. The photo to the left-hand side of the screen is from Darlinghurst in Sydney. The key to an approach like this is the collaboration and coordination between building managers and operators. And this kind of solution should be planned for at very early stages of a large precinct development to make sure waste containers are located more centrally at collection points that can be easily accessed by everyone and takes into account all the key considerations that relates to everyone in the precinct.
Interesting, Supun, because you talk about this being quite futuristic. If you go to Europe, where you've got a lot of tenement buildings and things like that, you have lower tech solutions like this, where everybody has big bulk bins at the side of the tenement buildings, where everybody takes their rubbish out, puts them in there. This is really providing a more sanitized and better looking example of that, where the big ugly bin is hidden below the street. It's actually going back in time, a more traditionalist approach to doing that sort of stuff. Yes, it means you need to go out in the rain to put your bins out, but as someone who frequently does this, because these bins are stored outside, so I usually survive the few spots of rain that drop on my head when I'm running out my slippers. So, how can we improve our approach to waste collection? You've listened to Supun and I's ideas. I'm sure, given the wealthy experience we've got on this thing, there are a lot of other solutions. So Supun and I have created a few questions that we'd love you all to put forward, because while we've pulled together 8 solutions, I'm very sure that everybody in this call can provide a lot more than that, given the experience and different backgrounds that everybody's got here. We would really love for you guys to fill this in, because I think this is really interesting for the industry. Do you want to run through the questions, Supun?
I do. Erica, do you mind dropping the link to this survey into the chat? Essentially, it's just a single question and you can do a long form answer. It's asking how can we improve our current approach to waste collection. So we are open to any sort of ideas, and we'll go through it after this talk and review them and sort of come back to you with what we think.
And also, if you think we're perfect, with no need to change at all, put that in. Like, we don't want to lead anybody along to any solutions. We want honest feedback and honest answers. So before we go through the collation of some of the questions, we just thought we'd conclude on what we were doing here and what we came up with. Look, every site is different. Every local authority is different. Every place is different. There isn't an easy tick box for every single situation. We need to sit there and find solutions that work for each site on its merits. And in order to do that, you need to be a little less prescriptive, where sitting there stepping, you need to do X, Y, and Z, sometimes doesn't give us the answer, because sometimes giving X, Y, Z provides us with something that, while it ticks a box for refuse collection, it may have negative impacts for everything else. Is there something that we can do better that has a better holistic outcome for everybody? We need to understand where we're making those different solutions or looking at things that are done differently. We need to understand what we're trading off against, and are these impacts positive, are they negative? And have a realistic thing, not always thinking about, well, if everything is the worst thing happened, then therefore we can't do this. There's always solution stuff. One of the things that quite often see coming up against is, well, what if somebody's parked on the street when a waste collection vehicle comes along there? Well, there's solutions to that. Parking restrictions, towing vehicles. If you get your car towed once because you've parked in front of where the waste collection comes along, you're not going to do it again. Well, not unless you've got really deep pockets. Again, we need to look at policy mechanisms that can be flexible, can support other collection mechanisms, and again, have that well thought out, so that rather than saying, here is a prescriptive checklist, is these are the outcomes that we want to achieve from that, and how do we manage to get to those outcomes. Have a look at doing stuff a little bit different. Where we've got those tighter precincts and we're trying to do more in less space, there's a lot of competing outcomes. And we all know, like, the nicer places are the ones that have got parks, that have got green space, that look good, that have third places for people to hang around. If we're taking it all up with all the grey concrete and the big turning areas, that sometimes isn't a good outcome. So let's look at different ways that we can share that and minimise the space needed. Even if we need a single large amount of space, it's better that's consolidated than that being spread and having various slightly smaller areas. And we need to understand what we're up against. If we don't know, if we don't measure what we actually need to be providing for, we're just going to be going off in directions based on a gut feel. Really collecting that data is going to really help us achieve a really good outcome. And again, let's not leave it to the last minute. We've all been in situations where the waste collection, the refuse stuff is a last minute thing and nobody's thought about it, and then we're trying to squeeze something in. We need to get engaging early, looking at what the outcomes are, bringing other practitioners in there, so that we're not just doing this in a silo, that we're actually bringing other people in and listening to their solutions. And sometimes as traffic engineers and transport planners, we're not always right, and we don't always think about the bigger picture of stuff.
Okay, so in terms of future directions, we are hoping to continue this research with help from AITPM. So after this webinar, we will consolidate all the insights we received from you today through the online surveys. We will be keeping the survey link active until the end of this month, and we'll circulate these links via AITPM so we can get more feedback from others who weren't able to attend today. We are then hoping to develop a guidance document similar to the ACT white paper that I mentioned, which can be used to facilitate discussions on this front. As Andy mentioned, this is a complex issue with no one-size-fits-all solution. So we are not hoping to develop a prescriptive document. Rather, it would be a guide with overarching principles that can inform practitioners of key considerations under different contexts with some real-world examples. Any progress we make on this front will be sure to keep you up to date via AITPM channels. And again, thank you for attending today. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact either Andy or myself via email.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. Lots of comments have come through in the Q&A, some comments and questions, and hopefully people were filling in that survey, and as you've said there, we'll distribute that. So if you didn't get a chance to fill it in today, or for those that watch this on demand, you'll be able to go back and provide your feedback through the survey. It is obviously an important issue, and particularly, you know, in really across the country with the housing, the housing crisis and the push from governments around increasing the provision of housing. There's great pressure for more housing to be built, and that's a mixture of, you know, housing on the fringe, but also increased density. And so addressing this as soon as we can, and working through those perhaps, you know, site-specific or council-specific solutions is quite important. We've got a couple of comments here, you know, around, I think that as you know, both sort of said, around that need to challenge the norms and manage demand and challenge that accepted practice, standards and guidelines with innovation. So the, you know, a number of people have flagged the need to do that, and so having these sorts of conversations in this forum are really important. So again, for those online, do fill in that that survey and help contribute to this this discussion. In the chat, Erica's dropped in that paper from the ACT, and if there are any people from the ACT and want to comment on that, please do put something into the chat. It would be interesting to hear from you on how that would work, or how that has been working. There's a question here around any thoughts on medium density designs that use rear loading, so laneways for access and servicing for waste collection rather than the sort of street curb. In a sense, it is still a curb, but it's a laneway curb. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. And that's one of the ones that I've seen pretty regularly, that we get pushed and pushed to have these laneways being wider and wider, so that what if a car's parked there? What if it can't get round? And I think as well with that sort of stuff, we need to really think about, are we being realistic about all those bad things happening? Are there ways to get around those things? Where getting around it, like, I mean, the easiest way for those laneway things to be serviced is by a side loader, and those side loaders are pretty flexible. The question that we keep getting back, and I've seen quite often, is, well, what if a car's parked there on waste collection day? And yes, look, that could be bad if one was parked there. But what I've seen, I used to live in Edinburgh for quite a few years, and we had similar issues with clearways where you had parking from 7 p.m. at night till 6 a.m. in the morning. And just before the morning rush, you would have tow trucks come along, and they would snatch up every vehicle that was stopping that clearway that allowed the bus service to come along there. There's no reason why in collection day, if you've got areas with these type of stuff, you can't send that round once or twice. You probably don't need to do it every single time, because it's going to, once it happens, you're going to learn from that lesson. So there's ways around that, I think, and we just need to think about the flexibility of how we achieve things and not always think the worst.
Yes, yeah, and look, I mean, that happens in standard residential streets when cars park in front of where you've put your bins out as well. So, you know, whether that's a street, you know, a normal street or a laneway, that circumstance can still occur. There's I guess the, you know, comment / question here around, you know, that issue of that, you know, there is sort of a council. And this is a broad comment around sort of a need for people to be serviced by waste infrastructure. And if you're using private providers with those smaller vehicles, you know, a development might be designed to minimise the space needed for this, and that agreement falls through, and then they need to be serviced by council. You know, what does that mean? And that sort of fallback, I guess, to those, you know, standards that might require the larger area. I mean, so I guess it is a sort of a complex issue, and it feels like perhaps what's happening at the moment is that we're designing to the worst case scenario, so the largest amount of space. Any thoughts on how you would get around that issue, though, of the, you know, the changing vehicles and different arrangements?
Well, Kirsty, it's quite often, I mean, I've seen it quite a bit, where you've got tight sites where you're having to use smaller refuse collection vehicles and do things privately. And that has been signed off by a lot of councils, and they're still collecting the fee. Now, for sort of a higher end BTR type stuff, I mean, I'm probably a little less sympathetic to them having to double pay for that. But the areas where I was sort of the thing is for smaller, build to, for sort of a affordable housing type stuff where you could do the same thing, squeeze more units in, and it's the same thing as you've got with some of the things that are being approved now, with smaller vehicles.
Also, some councils in New South Wales that are flexible to allow private contractors, they typically enter into this agreement, section 88E. So the service provider has to indemnify council for claims relating to non-service provisions and damages to council infrastructure. So the burden is on the service provider and the building operator. So it's contingent on them to figure out the solution if you can't provide service for some reason through a smaller truck.
But you're right, we need to go through the detail of that, because there probably is situations where that is not an achievable outcome, and especially for smaller councils, especially who don't have the resources to have a backup for things like that. So it's not always a one size fits all.
Yeah. Now I've got a question here around, so this is where density is 200 to 500 units, the efficiency of larger vehicles does matter a lot more than the smaller sites where the HRV provision may be much more marginal and drastically impact the site. Do you have any thoughts on the threshold?
Yeah, and look, there probably isn't a cut and dried threshold. It's probably a testing of every single site. And where you've got something that's got 500 dwellings, you've probably got a few towers in there. And with something like that, it might make sense to have one main collection area, and have bins loaded and taken from place to place to get that in, rather than having for each of those 4 or 5 towers separate things in there. But you're right, there is a limit where you can't, like a small refuse collection vehicle isn't going to be acceptable for every single development. If you've got a lot of dwellings coming off a single tower, you'd just be, the waste collection vehicle would just be there all the time, and that's not a good outcome for anybody.
Yeah.
I think in the case of ACT, they were allowing curbside bulk bin collections for buildings with less than 10 dwellings. In the white paper that I mentioned, now they're being a bit more flexible around that. So they're considering bulk bin curbside collections for up to 30 dwellings a building. So higher threshold there.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to, I guess, see how track that with the ACT around what's, actually occurring, and to people, from a community building perspective, is everyone using their own bin, or are they actually starting to share bins and not, not have to drag all the bins out onto the street? I'd be curious around that sort of level of community mobilisation and collaboration within we might have to do a follow-up with the ACT and see what's going on there. We've got a question around the transfer station approach, and so you've presented a range of different ideas here. A question around how big a transfer station could be, and any thoughts on what that might cost compared to the land that you would save. Might that stack up?
Yeah, and we've not done research on examples of that. What we wanted to do with this was start to get ideas and try and figure that out. Would it be a cost saving? And I'm not saying that in every situation it would be a cost saving, but where you've got a lot of like smaller density or higher density things in a smaller area, it starts to make sense. If you've only got 1 or 2 of these things spread out and then you have to have a big waste transfer station, then probably those efficiencies aren't going to work out. But it really is a case by case thing, and that's probably the whole driver to this presentation is, let's look at things on a case by case basis. Is there a solution for that type of stuff that helps everybody? Yeah.
Maria's keen to see some research into examples of sort of greener waste collection practices around the world, and perhaps whether that also relates to the vehicle size, time of day, electric vehicles, frequency, those kinds of things. Are there other things that either of you might have looked at in this that you haven't shared, or is that something that you might look at going forward? And I guess also throwing it back out to the audience, that if there are people that are looking at these ideas, for them to put that to you through this paper process.
100%. We have not went into details separating waste streams out and how you would manage that. I know that if you look across the world, I mean, you go to places like Germany, there's about 9 different types of bin for every single house, and they're really good at managing that, strategizing that out, which means your bin doesn't get collected all that often. I know that my mum's place back in Scotland, their waste collection bin is a tiny little bin that gets collected fortnightly, and they get weekly recycling collections, and they also have a brown waste, and they also have 2 different types of recycling. They've got sort of a paper bin, they've got a glass and cans bin. That sort of stuff comes with a big education piece as well, which I think we need to, it's worthwhile doing that in order to make sure we're actually getting sustainable practices. Sorry, Spoon, I just keep answering these questions.
No,
I'm going to tell me to
that's
shut
fine.
up, mate.
That's fine. Yeah, so Kirsty, that kind of things, they're very much on the agenda for future research. And obviously we are going to develop this sort of a white paper or some sort of guidance document with reference to a whole bunch of international case studies, which I have access to right now, but it's a lot more detailed, and we have to be a bit more nuanced in our recommendations.
Yeah. Now all of the comments are flowing in, and we'll run out of time here. But Richard has mentioned, the issues around communal bins on street, do have some other issues, and I guess, one of the challenges with some of these issues, and I think this is also not just for medium or high density sites, but does also affect just normal single housing sites as well, is around people's like personal safety, equity, and people with limited mobility, access to be able to move bins and things as well. So I guess looking at all of that, I think this issue of there not being a one size fits all solution also needs to have those sort of nuances of different households and abilities of people within their households.
100%, and I think that talks to the way we design our streetscapes as well, because sometimes we're trying to create these best practice waste collection areas where we're providing huge expanses of concrete. You look at that example that Spoon brought over, you end up with something that's actually less safe for people with mobility issues, because you've got a huge driveway, you've got more wider spaces so that cars and trucks and things like that are coming in and out of areas faster, which again impacts those with mobility issues, impacts those more vulnerable space users like kids, elderly, much more than it affects able people. So I think we've got a bigger issue of actually designing our precincts, our streets, our communities to be somewhere that we can all be proud of and that work for everybody.
That's right. And I think also, Andy, this is very much context dependent, as you have been saying, and also dependent on the different land use types. If in your building you have sort of a retail or a commercial use at the ground level, waste truck is not going to be the only truck that's going to be accessing the site. So you might anyway have to cater for like a freight truck or like a large vehicle for loading and other servicing stuff. So it's very much dependent on the specific case that you're looking at.
Excellent. We might need to just leave it there and start to wrap up here. But I think that there's been a lot of comments and questions in here. It's obviously a topic that there's a lot of interest in, including some questions around engagement with local government in this process, and whether who you've spoken to already. But I think one of the things to flag is that we are going to be having a local government forum next quarter, and so this might be a topic that will be part of that discussion, and see which councils might be keen to be involved in commenting on or engaging in this process, and seeing how we can continue and evolve this discussion. And it's an issue that's not just about traffic engineers or transport planners, but involves a wide range of different people, different parts of this puzzle, different professions, and really is sort of an issue that requires a multidisciplinary approach, and really agreeing what the outcome is that we're seeking to achieve, and then working in the direction to get that. I suspect at the moment there's different different outcomes or visions for this, and that's perhaps why we're getting some of these different solutions, thinking about it from a risk or a perspective or a cost perspective, or efficiency, density, range of different factors there. So getting all the people in the room might be a good start. But
100% Kirsty. And what Sabine was talking about earlier is we'd love it if people from local authority background, different backgrounds, came and helped us out with providing some sort of white paper on this and getting their viewpoints, because there's no point in coming from a single source. Like, we need to get all the viewpoints and get a decent solution.
fantastic. So look, we will draw it to a close there. So I'd like to thank you both for putting yourselves forward for this one when you got tapped on the shoulder to come forward and put this together. I think it's been a great conversation, lots of ideas there, lots of thoughts coming through from the people on the line. So thank you again for your involvement. To everyone, please do fill in the survey that will be coming out in the email following this, and you can view this back again on demand. So thank you all very much, and join us again for another AITPM webinar soon. Thank you.